This is the Flyerdelphia podcast, part of sportstalkphilly.com, with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heening. Hello, Flyers fans, and welcome to another edition of the Flyerdelphia podcast, part of sportstalkphilly.com. I'm your host, Kevin Durso, joined by Rob Riches. And the preseason is over. The roster is pretty much set, and we are closing in on the start of Flyers hockey for the 2018-19 season. So this is going to be your season preview of sorts. We'll put the wraps on the preseason, look at the final roster to this point, analyze some of the final cuts. We'll also look ahead to the season and expectations. It's always a big talking point at the beginning of the year. And then we'll also talk about a couple of off-the-ice things with the Flyers too. One, a report that surfaced last week. A former player retiring on Monday, and it would not be a Flyers podcast, obviously, if we did not talk about Gritty, the team's new mascot. So we've got a lot to get to. It's a jam-packed show, and let's not waste any time on it. Rob, let's get right to it. So final cuts. Let's start with some of the players that were the most recent cuts to this point. The one most recent waiver, the first wave of final cuts in a way, came following the Thursday game against the Rangers, or some of it following the Monday game too against the Bruins. Phil Myers was cut at first. He eventually came back up to play in Saturday's preseason finale, but he was ultimately cut from the team. At forward, you had Carson Twarynski last a really long time. He played in that Thursday preseason game against the Rangers, the 4-2 loss. So did Tyrell Goulbourne, and they were among the final forwards cut. Mark Friedman was another defenseman who got cut late, and obviously one of the big talking points of the preseason and training camp so far was Carter Hart, and he did fall a little short of making the team as the final goalie cut, and he was cut after the preseason finale on Saturday. So he was actually cut Sunday as part of the cuts. That was also when Myers and Friedman were sent back, so that brought the roster down to 24. And interestingly enough, I mean, here's the first thing that we need to kind of get into is that Corbin Knight was quite possibly on his way to a roster spot. He left Thursday's game with an injury, and it came out on Friday that he is going to be out for 3 weeks with an upper body injury. So an unfortunate end to his push for the team, at least for now. But we'll kind of get into that because the final cut we assumed on Monday was going to be something via the waiver wire. And that meant that a forward who had to pass through waivers was going to be cut. And we kind of figured that meant it was down to one of Dale Weise, Taylor Leier, or Jori Lehtera. And instead, when the waivers came out on Monday afternoon, Dale Weise and Taylor Leier were both on waivers, which would essentially clear 2 spots unless one of them hangs around after clearing waivers, if both should clear or one should clear or whatever will happen. So that's where it kind of got interesting, because now you have 2 players that could be moved to the minor leagues, and it kind of leaves this question in mind: what's that final spot being held for? Is it being held for Corbin Knight when he's healthy enough, or is something else in the works? Rob, I kind of want to get your take on all of the cuts first and foremost, and then any thought to the fact that they cut 2 or waived 2 players when they really only had to waive 1.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where, when you look at Dale Weise and you look at how maligned he's been throughout his time in Philadelphia, it looked like his days as a Flyer were limited. This is very reminiscent of that time a couple of years ago when Hextall, in a matter of just no fooling around, placed Andrew McDonald on waivers, and he spent the bulk of that season in Lehigh Valley. It's one of those things where it's really not a surprise to me to see Dale Weise on waivers. I mean, to me, there's really nothing about him that has been impressive throughout his time in Philadelphia. I'm seeing some buzz that maybe Montreal could be interested in a reunion with him, but obviously that's speculation at this point, and we would find something out about that tomorrow. And Taylor Leier is one of those guys who, I never really saw him being much other than, a bubble guy. He's one of those guys that could very well crack the roster, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised if he heads back to Lehigh Valley. As much as I like Lear's game, as much as I like what he has to offer, it's one of those things where, there's just only so many spots to go around. And it's one of those things where it's a very tough position for him to be in. And as far as Corbin Knight is concerned, there's no other way to put that other than it's just a shame, because you've seen how hard he's applied himself and busted his hump in the minors all this time, and he really did have a legitimate chance to make the team. It was kind of a dark horse story, kind of an underdog story, and it's one of those things where he was very much on that path, and and it just he ends up getting derailed with a 3 week injury. It's just it's a shame. It's the kind of stuff you hate to see, and obviously that's just what happens. And I don't like it. But we'll see how it is when he gets back, when he's healthy. If he goes back to the Phantoms, if he's able to come back up to the Flyers and do what he can up there, because he really was on track for a spot, and it's something where I would have liked to have seen him make the jump, but obviously it is what it is. Injuries happen, and we'll see how he goes from there.
You can say that again with injuries happening. This has been kind of a rough preseason of sorts with the Flyers with injuries. I mean, there's a lot of guys who are out there. Let's start with the fact that the only reason we were even talking about Carter Hart having a shot at making the team was because 2 goalies go down, and it wasn't a surprise. Michael Neuvirth was one of them, in the sense that he just can never seem to stay healthy no matter how hard he tries. And then Alex Lyon suffering that injury in warmups that turns out to be a 4-week injury, so that's pretty rough as well. Now you add Knight to the picture. You already have Sam Morin out until roughly February with the recovery from the ACL. And, there's a handful of others. I mean, you also had the prospect forward Pascal Laberge, who had hip surgery over the weekend. So that turned out to be a unfortunate blow for his development. He just really hasn't been able to stay healthy either at all. And he's kind of getting lost in that prospect pipeline, if you will. But back to the guys who actually we were just talking about. I'm going to touch on the guys Rob talked about for a minute first, and then I'll go into a couple others as well. Nothing wrong with what they've done with Dale Weise here. It's just been a deal that hasn't worked out from the start. He hasn't performed the way that his contract would warrant, for sure. He's kind of the forward version of Andrew McDonald in a sense, where the contract just doesn't match the potential contributions in a way. I wouldn't have had a problem if Weise wouldn't have been the guy placed on waivers or cut, as long as he wasn't getting into the lineup. I don't have a problem with him being a reserve for a 4th-line spot, because I feel like he's a veteran guy that you can trust to jump right in at a moment's notice. That's still something that's valuable in some way, but I don't want him being considered for the 3rd line or being a 4th-line regular at that point. So I can understand why they just opted to waive him. You can bury him in the minors until you need him. There's no real sense here in keeping him around. Leier, it's just unfortunate because he's had such a good minor league career, and for him to be called up and make the team out of camp last year and then really not get into the game that much. He only played 3 games in the last 3 months of the year, and that's just not enough for somebody at his level at this point where he is in his career too. He could be getting so much more out of it if he would stay on the Phantoms or be part of the minor leagues. And the problem with that is that you knew from last year you were subject to possibly losing him on waivers. You certainly hope in this case that this doesn't turn out to be another lost player through the waiver wire. If Danik Martel appealed to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and that's not saying Martel's not a good player, it's just that if he appealed to Tampa Bay and really didn't have much of an NHL experience behind him there on his resume, then Lear's got more of that, has shown that he can kind of be an in-betweener for now, and maybe a bigger opportunity would be what would get him to become a full-time NHLer. You really don't know. But if he can get an opportunity somewhere else, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for him. The Flyers certainly have to hope that they can keep him around and keep him in the minor leagues, because he can make the Phantoms a very dangerous team when the time comes. So now I wanted to go back to a couple of the other players that were in the final cuts as well, and get your take, Rob, on at least 2 players that I've heard a lot talked about, and that's Carter Hart and Phil Myers. And that's just because a lot of people like to jump the gun a little bit, or want to assume that everybody's ready to go effective immediately, or they see a guy play through the duration of the preseason and think maybe there should be a place for that guy if he lasted this long. And in some cases, that's just not how it works out. I looked at it this way. The way I looked at it first and foremost was Phil Myers in the game in Allentown first, and then the Monday game against Boston. I just didn't think he was great. He didn't do enough to kind of not break the door down, as Ron Hextall said. It was one of those situations where he's got the skill set. We can all see it, but he's not positionally sound yet when it comes to the NHL level. He's probably trying to do some things in these preseason games that he can get away with at the AHL level that he won't be able to get away with in the NHL because players are too good. They're going to catch him. Teams are going to be too good at getting out of the zone. If he pinches, it's going to create odd man rushes. It's going to create bad chances that your goalie's going to have to bail you out on, things like that. So I don't feel like at all that Myers was nearly as ready as people want to believe he is. I think he's close. I think the fact that he was around for most of the preseason tells you a lot, but I think it also tells you a lot that Mark Friedman had such a good preseason that he lasted the whole preseason, not what happened to Myers where there was one game where he was down in the minors while the Flyers played a preseason game. So that kind of says a lot to me. And then when it comes to Carter Hart, I wasn't disappointed in any way at the preseason he had. I thought he performed very well in every game. He obviously his first 3 games out, or first 3 appearances, because they were abbreviated in some way. He goes out, he makes every save he has to in the first game against the Islanders. He faces the Rangers in the 4th preseason game of the year and goes out and has an incredible third period, makes 25 saves overall, and has a night that makes you start to wonder if he's cut out for this. I don't want to call it an average night, but when you make 9 saves in that game in Allentown, it was okay. They weren't really testers. He wasn't put to the test in any big way, but he got the job done, and that's all you can ask for. But you'd like to have seen him tested more. And then when it rolled around that he was going to get the start against the Rangers again, and not really like any of the goals were his fault that he gave up. He gave up 3 in the game and took the loss playing the whole game, but it was a lack of shots that he saw in the 3 of those appearances. To play 30 minutes of a game and see only 11, to play 40, once he played 40 of a game and saw 25 or saw 27 shots realistically, that's more of the workload you were looking for him to have in the preseason. So playing the first half of the game in Allentown and seeing 9 shots isn't good enough. Playing the whole game against the Rangers on Thursday and only seeing 17 shots, that's not really good enough either, because that's a fairly light workload. And it's just not enough of a showcase for him. He's got to go down and get the time. And I don't think, I think that there's a little bit of an aspect of this where Michael Neuvirth comes into play, where Neuvirth is supposedly skating again, if he's closing in on a possible return, or could return even within the first 2 weeks of the regular season. To me, there's no reason Hart should be here to watch Brian Elliott start the season opener against Vegas, probably start the Colorado game on Saturday, probably start the home opener, and then at that point, you don't know where the progress is. At the very least, with Anthony Stolarz getting that backup spot to start, if Neuvirth's not ready by October 10th when they travel and play Ottawa, Ottawa's not supposed to be that great this year. So I'd feel comfortable putting Stolarz in as the backup to get that particular start, because it's finally maybe a level playing field for him to be comfortable, and he's been around a little bit, and it's a good opportunity with the back-to-back. By that point, your next game is Saturday the 13th against Vegas, and realistically, I'm just going off of those first 5 and going, if you can get through those first 5 games without Neuvirth, and then Neuvirth comes back, why would you keep Hart here if he's not even going to really see the ice? Because I don't sense that Dave Haxtell wouldn't pull a move like starting Elliott back-to-back against San Jose and Ottawa if it was hard on the bench. And you might see them be willing to give Elliott the night off and use Stolarz in that situation when it's the other way around. That's just my take on it. I feel like Hart's not going to be a full year AHL player either. I feel like his time is going to come before the NHL season is out. Injuries will happen, something else will happen, and when the time comes, if he's performing incredibly well, and if he plays as well as he made this audition look, really, then he should be the first call when the time comes, whenever that may be. So whenever that may be, I think he's coming up on it. I think Myers isn't far. I think Friedman's given himself a chance to be a potential call-up as well. So I think there's a lot of good depth there that they were able to make this move to get some guys extended playing time. You get Phil Myers top pairing playing time in the AHL, and you get Carter Hart number 1 goalie time in the AHL, and you don't take away from their development while you're trying to get through something maybe that's minimal or only a couple weeks or something like that. Rob, I want to kind of get your thoughts on Hart and Myers in particular, because they're just the 2 names we keep hearing about more and more. Is why not Myers staying? McDonald doesn't look healthy, or or over. Why not Myers over Christian Folin or something like that? We see that a lot. And the same thing with Hart, where if Hart outperformed everybody, why isn't he on this team? There's a deeper layer to that, I would think, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I think that with Phil Myers, what a lot of people, I don't want to say people forget this, but it's still something to keep in mind as well, because we always talk about how goalies they take some time to develop. It's a lengthy process, and it's a very similar process with defensemen as well, where like you don't want to exactly rush a lot of guys into the fire right away. They need their time to develop. And Phil Myers is a guy who will benefit from another year in Lehigh Valley. I mean, I like the guy's skill set. I like what he has to offer. But it's one of those things where he's a guy where he's going to need a lot more time to develop. He's going to need a lot more time to kind of hit his stride a little bit. And if it takes another year in Lehigh Valley, I have absolutely no problem with that. This would be his second year there, no?
Yeah, second year.
Yeah, second year. So that's absolutely not a problem as far as I'm concerned. He's a guy who could certainly benefit from it. It's something that could do him favors in the long run, and I'm on board with it. And as far as Hart's concerned, it's one of those things where a lot of people are so quick, and I absolutely understand why in a situation like that. But a lot of people are quick to anoint him as the future, the savior of the franchise. We always talk about the goaltending hell that it's been for the Flyers since Ron Hextall left, and I absolutely do get that. And Carter Hart's a guy who very well could break that mold, and there's a very bright future with him between the pipes for Philadelphia. But it's one of those things where he could very well get his shot this year just because of how things go. Goaltenders like Neuwirth and Elliott going down with injuries. So it's one of those things where it's not a surprise for me to see him start the year in Lehigh Valley. Let's see what he can do in his first professional season, what he can do with the Phantoms, and come up when he needs to come up. If it gets to that point where they're running out of goalies and they got to bring him in, I'm all right with it. I have no issue with that. It's I'm not quick to throw so much pressure on the kid and kind of bring him up to the Flyers right in his first professional season. That's just something that I don't know how realistic that could have been. I saw something not too long ago. I think it was a Flyers group on Facebook where somebody had one of his Silver Tips jerseys. It was hanging up alongside a Hextall jersey and a Pelle Lindbergh jersey, and it's let's not crown the kid just yet. Let's let him develop and let's let him hit his stride. And it's one of those things where he will. It's like you said. It's very likely that he'll be here before the season's up, and it's one of those things where he can even come up at a good time and get a feel for everything depending on how the season goes. And obviously once we deal with the inevitable goaltender injuries, which are already plaguing the team so far with Neuwirth, he could very well get his chance sooner rather than later, or he can wait a little bit and get a little more time with the Phantoms and see how well he does with them.
You bring up a great point, Rob, because I will make this full reference for you. I was at one of the preseason games. I'm up in the press box talking to the great Bruce Scoop Cooper, Flyers historian, who was quick to remind that let's remember Pelle Lindbergh also spent time in the minors too. He spent a couple years in Maine before making the jump to the NHL as well. So just because one of these kids is defined as a potential future of the franchise, maybe the next greatest thing in goal, does not mean that they are effective immediately ready. They're not going to be ready so early in their development. He hasn't had a pro season yet. You've got to give him that kind of time to adjust to the pro game a little bit. He's talked about it himself too. I mean, the interesting part of it is that if there was any kid who I think could have handled it, I think Carter Hart could have handled it. Talking to him at training camp at different times over the course of the last couple of weekends, and he just seems like he goes about his own business, doesn't listen to outside noise, and is very motivated and confident in himself. He's got a lot of self-confidence and doesn't get rattled too easily either. I mean, he's a perfectionist to a sense where he wants to stop everything all the time. And understandably so. That is his job after all. But, he's got such a good head on his shoulders so far. He's not one of these guys who is in his own head, and he's not out there the way that, say, Ilya Brizgalov was or anything like that. Every goalie's a little different, but a lot of them have some weird ticks and tendencies and things like that. He's not really out there like that as much, but he's very confident in his own abilities, and he's not willing to let somebody else tell him when the time's going to come. He'll try to dictate that himself by how he plays, and that's a big thing. So I really, really appreciate what he brings to that, because you like seeing a kid like that. You like seeing the self-confidence, the fact that don't talk to me about next year, talk to me about this year, because that was what he was trying to do, is make the team this year. And yeah, it didn't work out. He's going to benefit greatly from being in Lehigh Valley, I think. I think getting the start in the game there, the preseason game there, was great for him too, just to get a feel for it, to get a feel for the crowd. He talked about that during training camp at one point in time. And all of that to me factors in. So I do think he's going to be here sooner rather than later. I definitely think he'll be here by next year, because at this point, he really damn near earned himself a spot this year. And I was starting to think that it was possibly going to happen, just with the way that that the injuries played out. It was quite possibly turning into the perfect storm for him to get a spot effective immediately. And it almost did. I think that the two things that went against him were Neuvirth possibly being close to returning, where if it was just going to be 4 or 5 games and that's all he's going to be up for, don't even worry about sitting him on the bench. Let's just get him to the minors so we can start right away. And 2, I think Brian Elliott's game on Saturday against the Bruins, where he makes 26 saves, I believe it was, on 27 shots. You couldn't have asked for anything better from Brian Elliott as a final push before the regular season begins, as a final display for you. And at the same time, that was the game that Carter Hart needed on Thursday against the Rangers. He needed that kind of performance. And unfortunately, you couple the lack of shots that he saw, which is not really, that's out of his control, and the way that the team played in front of him for a good chunk of that game. And that's where everything kind of, that perfect storm kind of disappears for him, and it clears up, and it turns back into the situation where you have to remind yourself that he's 20 years old. It's going to be his first pro year. Pump the brakes a little bit and hold up for just a second there. So that's the thing to me that kind of got in the way of him being on that roster. But I think you made great points there, Rob, with that. Let's get to the actual start of the season coming up on Thursday night. Flyers, Vegas Golden Knights. That's the first game of the season. They'll stay out on the West Coast, or western side of the country anyway, for their second game of the year as well, against Colorado. And the beginning of the season, to me, just allows you to start thinking possibilities. It's a clean slate. It allows you to think about the possibilities. I really don't like people talking about that they're either going nowhere or they're going to be this. Like, honing expectations is a big thing, and you want to have expectations. You want to have high expectations, especially if you think a team's improved, but you want to have high expectations within reason, in my mind. And that's, what are the things that you see that you feel like can be an improvement? So, like, I look at this team and I go, on paper, they got better. They definitely have better scoring depth, because now Scott Lawton and Michael Raffl and Jordan Wheel are fourth-line guys. You got Mikhail Vorobiev coming in, who had a great preseason, as consistent as anybody, and he should be added depth as well. Then there's the expectations that come in also, and you're going, what's progress here? This is the biggest thing for me this season, is that you've improved on paper. Your GM went out and made a move that said that you should be taking a step here. And to me, the only way that you show that you've taken a step is by making the playoffs comfortably, not the final day of the season, not the final weekend of the season. Make the playoffs comfortably and be in that position for most of the year. Not, look at last season, and the 10-game losing streak had people talking about draft lottery for a little while before it came back. The year before that, 10-game winning streak, riding high, pushing for a top two or three spot in the division, and then the plummet back to kind of reality of what that team was and missing the playoffs. You can't have those kind of peaks and valleys like that. They need to be much closer together, much more consistent, and you need to go out and perform like a team that's got a really good top 9, a really good top defensive pairing, and hopefully get more consistent goaltending in some form. But mainly, go out and be in a position to make the playoffs without having to worry about that last weekend. And then once you get to the playoffs, the goal needs to be to try to win a playoff series here. You've got, I don't know that they're going to do that based on what they've done on paper or how they've looked in the preseason. It's way too soon to tell. You can get hot at the right time and win a playoff series that you have no right being in, possibly on paper. But I don't know they're going to do that. But that needs to be the goal. If you're going to show progress, you got to get to the playoffs and probably win a playoff series to make that kind of progress in my eyes. So, Rob, what are your expectations kind of for the team, kind of from all angles here, like I said, with the depth or just from expectations of making the playoffs?
I mean, when you look at the final roster as it stands now, uh, like as you mentioned, that they did get a lot better, especially with the James Van Riemsdyk acquisition. There's still a lot of young guys. You still have Nolan Patrick, Jordan Wheel, and you have younger guys. You have Lindblom in his first full season, and you have Vorobiev in his rookie year. But aside from that, not a lot of non-tenured guys on the team. So most of the guys on the roster, Christian Folin notwithstanding, and Van Riemsdyk, you have guys that they've been around over the past few seasons. They have that familiarity with Dave Haxtell and his system, and you basically it's another year onward and upward, and it's honestly it's kind of funny how things shake out because it seems like the perception of the Flyers outside of Philadelphia is a lot higher than it is in Philadelphia because in Philly, obviously, it's very dominated by the Eagles right now, as they look to defend their Super Bowl title, and which as the Sixers are building off their best season in years, it's something where they're kind of the talk of everything right now, and the Flyers are kind of an afterthought where it's like, hey, maybe they make the playoffs or maybe they don't. But I feel like around the rest of the league, like there's some people that I'll check in with who don't follow the Flyers as closely, and they'll think that the Flyers can have a low key great year, and obviously it's a situation where I hope that they're right. We'll definitely see, but I think that the Flyers could be in a spot this year where they could definitely return to the playoffs. If they're not, obviously clinching a spot well before the final week of the season. I'm not saying that they're going to win the Metro Division this year, but it's something where maybe they can get a top 3 playoff spot. Who knows? I mean, it's something where if they're able to find their groove, if they're able to find their consistency, they could very well make it back to the playoffs, maybe make it a tighter series, and who maybe even find a way to win a playoff series. I'd be okay with that. It's been too long since they've done that, so. We're talking back to 2012, so it's something where they're a little hungrier. It's going to be something that they're obviously going to want to do, and if they're able to find a way, I think that they definitely can this year. They've got younger talent. You've got only a handful of guys playing for Haxtell or coming for the team for the first time, and obviously the return of Van Riemsdyk as well, and. It's something where I think that they could have a very decent year. I think that they could surprise a lot of people, and we'll definitely see how that goes. Now, one thing that, as we touched on earlier, that's kind of been a consistent for them throughout the preseason is just too many guys getting hurt. A lot of guys going down with injury. You hope that they kind of regress to the mean in that regard, but if that's something that continues throughout the season, that could be a bit of a dagger for them, and we'll see. But obviously, the injuries are they're the one thing that you can never predict. Anything can really happen. Anybody can get hurt for any amount of time, and all sorts of things happen over the course and the rigors of an 82 game season. So, that's something where they'll have to work on staying healthy. And if they're able to do that, they could very well surprise a lot of people this year.
I think you raise a great point with the injuries, and while they're unpredictable, one of the things that I find that stands out is so far, Neuvirth's injury was probably expected. Lyons is disappointing just because he kind of was one of those guys who had an outside shot. Lyon probably is the guy who would have filled the void for Neuvirth if he wasn't hurt himself. So that's why Stolarz gets the backup spot to start and Carter Hart's in the minors. I don't even think we're having the discussion about Carter Hart that we did if Lyon wasn't hurt too. So that being said, And I don't really look too much into the Sam Moran injury right now because that's, first of all, it's something that people have known since the offseason, but also he wasn't on the roster last year. You'd like to have him on the roster this year, of course, but, because you love a guy, people love a guy with that kind of size and that kind of physicality, but that doesn't really factor into it either. The big thing with injuries, and this is what changes the perception on paper, because like we said, they got better on paper. There's no question. But here's the thing when it comes to an injury. If Claude Giroux gets hurt, if Ivan Provorov gets hurt, if Shane Gostisbehere gets hurt, if Sean Couturier gets hurt, I'm going to probably limit it to those 4 specifically. There's more who could probably join the list. But if those 4 in particular end up getting hurt for any significant period of time, this team's done. They're not going to go far without those players in the lineup on a regular basis. Ivan Provorov is the anchor of the defense. Shane Gostisbehere is a power play quarterback. Claude Giroux is your leading forward, your captain, and without him on the ice, there's a noticeable difference. And Sean Couturier is the defensive stalwart forward who also started to come around offensively. So you've got all these guys who have specific roles and yet are so pivotal to the team's success. Now, the Flyers have played in years past without Sean Couturier and found a way to make it work. Not saying that that's impossible, but I just wonder where that would be coming from. Who's going to jump into that spot? At that point, if Sean Couturier gets hurt now as opposed to 2 or 3 years ago, this isn't he's out of his spot, Claude Giroux still number 1 center, and fill in the blank. Now this is number 1 center out of the picture. You can either move Giroux back to center, which has not worked nearly as well for his offensive production, or you're bumping Nolan Patrick up to number 1, which means that at that point your number 2 is either going to be Mikhail Vorobiev, a rookie, or somebody like Scott Lawton who leapfrogs and falls in line there. And the depth goes out the window a little bit if somebody like that gets hurt. So that's where he's more of a dangerous loss because you lose your depth, you lose your defensive quality guy here who really plays two-way hockey as well as anybody in the league. That's why he was the runner-up for the Selke last year. And that's a big thing to me. I also find it interesting what you talked about by bringing the Eagles into it too. It was really funny. The Eagles go and play a game on Sunday against the Tennessee Titans, lose in overtime, and head coach Doug Peterson loses some of the aggressiveness at times that made him help build that team into a Super Bowl champion a year ago. They weren't as aggressive in certain spots. Certain areas were really, really underperforming, and you kind of knew there was better, and you were waiting for the adjustment, and there was no adjustment. It was ride it out with his guys, kind of. And the thing about that is that I saw a lot of people on Twitter comparing it to Dave Haxtell, and they're going, this feels like the play for a tie kind of thing. Play for the overtime, play for the single point, that gets you something. I can't say that people were necessarily wrong here, and I think what you want to see is Dave Haxtell turn a corner here on himself here and be a better head coach, or at least start utilizing these players the right way. You've got a great top 3 lines going here. That's a great top 9, especially when you can factor in Vorobiev jumped in, took that spot, looked perfectly capable of being a contributor to this team, effective immediately. He's going to be playing alongside and it depends on how you want to shuffle the lines up, but he was playing with Oscar Lindblom and Wayne Simmons as his wingers. That's a great third line. And then to think about how when the second line wasn't completely getting it done, they pulled JVR off the second line and put Lindblom on the second line and put JVR on the third line. Even better. Here's all these guys. Here's depth galore at forward as long as everybody stays healthy. Defensively, it's much more of a struggle because I like Travis Sanheim. I like Robert Haig. I think both of them bring a unique aspect to the game here, but they're not capable of being the number 1 D pair. And I think everybody got a good look at what would happen if Ivan Provorov and Shane Gostisbehere were not part of the lineup if you watch Saturday's preseason game. There were certainly dicey moments. And the reason there were dicey moments is because you didn't have guys like that who bail everybody out of those situations. Gostisbehere has gotten better defensively because of playing with Ivan Provorov. Ivan Provorov's done more creative things offensively, probably from playing with Shane Gostisbehere. They've complemented each other really well. They both have been excellent offensive performers. They've both been increasingly better defensively. Provorov, like I said, is an absolute stud defensively. You can't afford to lose guys like that. So that's where the big thing kind of comes into play. But you want to see everybody stepping up. You want to see the best lineup on the ice. You want to see everybody putting their best foot forward on a regular basis. This team came out against the Bruins on Monday in a preseason game and didn't show up for the first 20 minutes. And that can't happen in the regular season. It's happened too far often in the past. That's where the expectations become not too great, but you sit there and you go, you want to have those expectations because you look at the team on paper and go, they should be better than what they are on the ice sometimes. But if they show up and they do play like that, then the result you get is going to be the result you deserve. And that's how this is going to play out. So to me, I'm with you, Rob. I see a top 3 divisional finish here. I'm definitely not willing to go so far as to sit there and say that they should win the Metropolitan Division. They could end up in the running, and I only say that because when they got on a roll last season, they took the division lead for a handful of days. In a year where they were far from being the best team in the Metropolitan Division, there they were for a couple of days in February leading the division. It's certainly possible. I see them finishing 3rd in the Metro personally, and I think that that's a good start. Doing it the way that you should do it. I'll say it that way. They finished 3rd in the Metropolitan Division last year too, but they did it by kind of falling into that backwards by having to win a game on the final day of the season. They win theirs. The other teams that were already locked in or close to had the luxury of resting players and didn't have to win that final game, so they didn't, and it put themselves further behind, and they went on to be wildcard teams. Granted, none of them won. At the end of the day, when the second round of the playoffs happened, you had Pittsburgh and Washington playing each other as 1-2, and you had Boston, Tampa Bay playing each other as 1-2. Sometimes that's just how it goes, but there's a difference between, you look like it's interesting. You looked at Columbus last year in the playoffs. They got one of those wild card spots. They played Washington, and they won the first 2 games in Washington. That's a team that went on to win the Stanley Cup later in June. But they lost the first 2 games of the playoffs to a wild card team that really had them on the ropes going back to their own building. And if the Flyers can kind of be that team and be in that 3rd spot with more confidence, than we had to use every ounce of energy to get here, to get a draw like Pittsburgh or Washington that would be 2nd. It's probably going to be a close margin, but I don't see them being quite there to challenge for the division lead, but they will be certainly pushing playoff status and being in a good position. So I want to shift gears now to some of the off-the-ice stuff. We have a lot of that to talk about too, and we're already well into the show as it is, talking about the preseason and roster cuts and all that. So let's get right to it. And Rob, I want you to kind of talk a lot about this because, after all, you were the one who had it first. The story went up on sportstalkphilly.com. I believe it was Tuesday morning, bright and early. It was a report that came out on Monday afternoon in Finnish time. But the story was that Jori Lehtera, the Flyers forward, was considered a suspect in a Finnish cocaine bust. And that kind of sent shockwaves through social media surrounding the Flyers. It was kind of a interesting story to come out. Lehtera is obviously not the most well-liked Flyer by fans because of the contract that he has, and he's really kind of an underwhelming player in that sense. He's a depth guy who leaves a lot to be desired. But this is kind of a story. It's a little bit bigger than hockey in a sense. Rob, give me your take on that as you kind of came across the report and put the story together and all of that, because I know that I didn't even see it the night before. I woke up to it, and I was just kind of blown away by it because I just happened to catch that something on our Twitter feed was picking up a ton of steam, and I was really not sure what it was, saw what it was, and didn't really know what to think. What was going through your head?
That is the perks of being up at all hours of the night, Kevin, is that you could see stories like this kind of come up and get something on it. But yeah, that is something that is completely wild as far as I'm concerned. That's just honestly, if you told me at some point that the Flyers will. If you told me at the time of that trade for Jori Lehtera at the 2017 draft that he would end up being questioned by Finnish police for a large-scale cocaine bust, there's no way I would believe that. That's something where certainly a very very shocking story. But from what I've gathered from the report, it's something where this is quite a significant. A significant bust in Finland, and it's something where it kind of stems from the fact that people were arrested at his cottage over the summer. He's got a cottage on a lake in southern Finland, and that's where people were arrested. So it could very well be something where you know there's not a lot going on, where it's just, hey, he gave his friends the keys to his place, and or maybe he might have kicked in some money that went into this ring without his knowledge, or what have you. It's something where he very well could be not directly involved, just kind of his money or his property is being used in it, and that's where it could go. I mean, who knows? Or he could very well have an active role in it. We don't know how this is going, and obviously it's in the hands of the Finnish judicial system now, and I can't really say that I'm any kind of expert on that. As far as I'm concerned, that's kind of beyond my scope. But it's something where I figured that if it did have legs, that the Flyers were going to look to kind of move on from him, just because it's one of those things where it's not worth the distraction. We see how that is in a lot of circles where teams are moving on from players kind of convicted or accused of criminal offense, not necessarily as a matter of trying to be upright and be like, oh, well, we don't want any kind of criminal behavior. It's just because they don't want the distraction that comes with criminal behavior on the team. And, that's something where we'll see how it plays out with Jori Lehtera. And from what I understand from what I've learned about how Finnish crimes work, is that there are, but kind of similar to how we have a misdemeanor offense and a felony offense. It's something similar with their narcotics law under their Narcotics Act, where there's a narcotics offense, which is you can get maybe 1 or 2 years of jail time tops, and there is the aggravated narcotics offense, which that's the serious one that can get you anywhere between 1 and 10 years in prison, and that's something where this case. This cocaine thing that they're investigating, that counts as an aggravated offense, and if Lehtera is somehow implicated in that, if the police do find more on that, that's something where he could be looking anywhere from 1 to 10 years jail time, and that's depending on how things go for him. So that's something where it's completely unexpected, kind of came out of the blue on everybody, and I'm not sure if he stayed in North America throughout the summer or if he went back to Finland. It's all kind of a tough game, and it's something where we'll see how it goes, and this could be very serious for Jori Lehtera.
Yeah, no question. And I mean, here's the thing about it. I'm not going to sit here and crack a joke or trash the guy or anything like that for something that we don't know. We don't know his level of involvement, like you said, and if he's not an active participant in this, and maybe he's just a like almost a fringe suspect in the sense that, yes, it's his property that's involved. Who knows if there's any money in it from him or anything like that. But if he's not actively involved in participating, then who am I to judge the guy right now without any facts out there? He said himself, we're all going to see that he didn't do anything wrong. Well, certainly we'll have to wait and see. But for now, you kind of just try to go about business as usual. He did still make the team. Doesn't mean he's going to be in the lineup necessarily, but he's on the team. That means he's going to be around. He's going to be a part of the locker room, and he's going to be a part possibly on the ice too. And for now, that's just something you have to deal with. I mean, there's not really much else that you can say about it. It's just one of those things where it's a strange story. It's certainly kind of capped off, or put an exclamation point in a way, on a really, really weird week for just the Flyers organization in general. We're going to get into that, the other aspect of that, in a minute. But it was just, the timing of it was very weird. It was fairly out of the blue for something that, there was less than 3 games left in the preseason at that point. Here's this report. Cuts are going on. I find it interesting with the way that the roster panned out too, because like we just said, okay, yeah, so he was on the roster. At the same time, I wonder if the Flyers don't change their mind or do something differently if Corbin Knight was able to stay healthy and play and was able to make the team right away. Would that have changed something? Would that have made Lehtera more suspect or subject to being placed on waivers? would that have changed the game a little bit for him? The one thing that I found baffling about him not going on waivers was the fact that between this and the contract, no one's going to take this guy off of waivers. So he's as safe of a waiver placement as you can get. It's just a matter of clearly, if he's on the roster in any capacity, that he's on there because he's intended to play, I think. I would think. There's no reason for him to be on the roster if he's just going to take up a spot. And, I mean, look, cap issues are not what they were previously, and he'll come off the books after this season when his contract's up, and I don't think there will be anything further on that than that. But it still is just strange to see him keep the spot and essentially factor into possibly being a playing, a part of the playing lineup. I don't know how that helps the team. I do think there's an element of distraction to it. I think there's going to be, especially, I wouldn't want to put him out there in a game on the road right now because I feel like there's enough people who would know something about it and be shouting a few things that would be distracting. You don't want that either. So I think the combination of the whole thing is just a little strange, and we'll see where it goes. But I think the Flyers have to prepare themselves for the possibility of whenever either somebody comes up or whatever, you may have to just get ready to part ways with this guy and do the waiver move and then get him out of here just to save yourself from having to deal with that. Who knows what will be going through his head or whatever like that if something came closer to being a trial thing or something like that. You never know. And you just want to you're going to let it play out, but this could get very, very interesting for sure. So let's get to the moment you've all been waiting for. Last Monday, the Flyers unveiled a new team mascot. It was kind of hinted at before. We didn't really talk about it on the show too much because we weren't reading into a couple of minute-long videos or whatever on social media. We saw them. Yes, the speculation from the very beginning was this is a mascot story. It's a backstory. They're going to introduce a new mascot. Well, one of the stories that went up this Monday, 1 week since, on sportstalkphilly.com was a story that I wrote that I just called it was quite a week for Gritty. Or quite a first week for Gritty, I should say. That was what the headline of the story was. And quite honestly, I can't believe I've written 3, maybe even 4 articles on the Flyers mascot. It just blows my mind that I'm doing this. Let's just kind of get the rundown of why it was quite a week for him first, and then Rob and I will do our thoughts because obviously it's been getting quite the response one way or the other, we'll say it that way. Let's start with this. Gritty did not exactly get the best reception to start with. Social media kind of went crazy from the beginning, especially locally. I was there on Monday night for the Flyers-Bruins game when Gritty made his in-arena debut, and let's just say that didn't go well either. That's putting it lightly. Basically, the summary of what happened was his very, very first appearance came on the Jumbotron during Kiss Cam. He, I guess, pretends to kiss a girl or something like that, this young girl who was there, and then proceeds to hand over mouthwash while the crowd is just booing mercilessly. He follows that up with the on-ice appearance during the intermission. You're going to throw out T-shirts or use a T-shirt gun or something like that, Well, there were no skates on the mascot, so he took about 10 steps and wiped out and then tried to mask it with doing a snow angel or something like that. So it was very strange. The crowd didn't like it. There was a lot of booing going on. They put him up to do a dance in between stoppages. That gets boos. He, did finally come out on skates for the second period, but again, it was a very poor reception. And then kind of something funny happened, and it's something that's happened before. We already talked a little bit, like we made a reference to the Eagles and the Super Bowl and all of that type of stuff and the way it is when you're riding a high from being a champion in any sport. Well, the kind of thing that came out of the Eagles winning the Super Bowl was the "no one likes us, we don't care" mantra. And well, when the national media and when other fans and people around the nation kind of started getting into the fun of making fun of this mascot and criticizing it and having things to say, it turned into a rally cry. No one likes us, we don't care. And now we're going to like the mascot because no one else does. And that's going to be our marker. Well, Gritty has now been very, very embraced and has been all over the place, really, since that happened. If you don't follow him on Instagram or Twitter, you should. It's kind of comical at this point. On Twitter, he has over 100,000 followers, which is far and away the most of any mascot in the NHL. On Instagram, he probably by now, as of Sunday night, he had 48,000. By now, it's probably over 50,000. So get on there, because a couple of these things are in Instagram stories or on Instagram as posts. So he made an appearance on the Tonight Show. He goes up to New York, goes on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, and did a little skit with Jimmy Fallon and Ricky Gervais, and took a bunch of pictures that were on the Instagram account of him on the couch or behind the drum set where the Roots play and all that stuff. It was really, really comical. He did get to meet a couple members of the team, his new best friends, as he put it, Claude Giroux and Wayne Simmons, and their interactions with Gritty are, if not as funny, funnier than the mascot itself, just because they actually really do play up to it a little bit. It was really kind of funny. And then on Saturday, he's at the Phillies game. He meets the Philly Fanatic, which you could say Gritty's kind of loosely based off of. It's the same creator, that kind of thing. So he meets the Philly Fanatic. He dances with the Philly Fanatic. He gets a huge reception at the Phillies' second. It was the second to last game of the season for the Phillies. So he gets an absolutely huge reception. There's photos, there's video, and it's just taken off like wildfire at this point. Everybody's just loving it. Later on that night, he's part of the Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live. And on Sunday night, he was part of Last Week Tonight with Jamie Oliver. And it was all the late night shows had a blast with this. All of the national media loved it or turned it into something at the end. And it became, quite possibly, this might be one of the best PR moves the Flyers ever made without everybody realizing it at the start, because this thing has gotten around so much since it started. Let me just ask you, Rob, because I had my thoughts on it initially, and I want to hear your thoughts on it. Kind of take me through the progression from Monday of last week to Monday of this week, and the difference in 1 week, or if there is any difference, what your initial reaction was to now.
It's funny how things work out, because obviously, Kevin, if you look at it, our whole lives, basically, the Flyers never had a mascot, and that was always something that I kind of enjoyed about them. They never had a mascot. It was always like the Flyers far and away always had kind of the best in-game experience of the four major Philly teams, and that's something where I think that not having a mascot was kind of a part of that, where where you basically you're able to focus a lot more on the on ice stuff. And there was a rumor that I had heard, and obviously I don't think that this has been confirmed. I don't even know if it can be confirmed, where supposedly the NHL wanted to make the Flyers adopt a mascot, and they really didn't want to do it, so they just said, here we go, here's this. I don't know the veracity of that. I don't know how true that is, and I'm taking that with a grain of salt. I don't really know how much I believe that, but it's one of those things where, it's a philosophy that Ed Snyder kind of lived by, where no press is bad press, where you bring this new mascot into the fold, and it goes viral. It becomes the most searched term on Google, and you got everybody pretty much embracing it and kind of slowly falling in love with it. And I do think that one thing that the Flyers definitely, it's kind of funny, they got it right and they got it wrong at the same time, was how they introduced Gritty. Because it's like when you watch like the promotional videos and the promotional photographs that went around that first day, where pretty much everything got turned into a meme, because Gritty was just so terrifying. I guess it was just the way that the shots were lit, or whatever, the lighting that they were using, or just how they went about everything. But they made Gritty out to be so terrifying. And it's something where when you watch his appearance on Jimmy Fallon, or whether or not he's kind of running around dumping popcorn on Rangers fans at games, and just or dancing with the Fanatic on the dugout, it's something where he's goofy. He's just got that lankiness about him. He's just a goofball. He's just kind of screwing around, and it's almost kind of funny. He's got that big old grin on his face, which is just hilarious. The googly guys, they kill me every single time. And You saw that there was that shot that was going around where he was meeting the players, and he meets Simmons, and Simmons has that big old grin on his face, like he's a little kid again or something like that. And
Right?
it's something where you know at the same time, I think that they got it wrong in how they did the shots, but they got it right because that definitely helped Gritty go viral. And you saw all the memes that kind of came out of that. You know how people are saying that he's the Fanatic's cousin from Delco, and there was the one that cracked me up. It was funnier than I really thought it had the right to be. It was Gritty photoshopped outside of Wawa, where he's like, "Hey, buddy, you got an extra cig?"
Yeah. That one got floated around, yeah.
Just all the memes that were going around, just like there are people that I know that probably can't even spell hockey, and they're going around to quote the great Samuel L. Jackson, that is, and they're going around sharing all these pictures of Gritty, and they're kind of hopping in on the craze. So the Flyers definitely, I don't think that they just got what they wanted. I think they got everything they wanted and more. Just because, just the reaction, just everybody had something to say about Gritty, and that's something that really worked out for them. And that it's not often that you get to see the Flyers become a national story, unless it involves the general manager and the best player, going at each other's heads or something like that. You don't see the Flyers making national news very often, and for them to do that with Gritty, that's something where it really worked out for them. I guess it worked out a lot better than they thought it was going to work, and we'll see how it goes. It's kind of weird having a mascot now for the Flyers, but we'll see how it is.
This was an interesting one for me. First of all, I agree with you 1,000% on the intention of the unveiling. I mean, first of all, you can't go wrong with, if you're going to do something, go for the in-person part of this. I mean, if you're going to go do something, grab a bunch of kids, pull them out of school, and then say, we're taking you to the Please Touch Museum, and they're going to bring some hockey mascot in. You may not even know what this is, but just cheer. You're going to get a bunch of kids to cheer no matter what it was. For everybody who watched what was streamed, though, I think we all took one look at this thing and kind of went, what on earth? Like, who came up with this? And the video was worse. I agree with you. It looked like a lighting issue to me. I think what they were going for was kind of it's a combination of the promotional lighting that they do. You see them on TV broadcasts all the time. The classic thing is it's done at Media Day. You'll see the player turn to face the camera, and they show the number on the sleeve, and then the guy turns and then is facing the camera.
It makes the player look more intimidating.
Right, and it's designed to look cool for a broadcast because it's that it's that away from the ice shot. It's like it's not something where you're just showing what's happening now. You have a little. It's literally no more than 5 seconds. It just transitions to what you're going to talk about, or to a highlight reel or something like that. So I got the intention of that. And the other part that I compare it to is when you see the team take the ice for the home opener, they don't enter the ice from the player bench. They enter from where the Zamboni tunnel is and kind of come out of opening video doors, if you will, that showcase the player name, number, all that kind of stuff. And then there's lights that go up and other special effects and things of that nature, and they always try to do it a little bit more. This year, I don't know if you saw this, Rob, but at Thursday's game they have lights in the stanchions now of the Wells Fargo Center, so that's a really cool touch too. So I like that. So there's always ways to try to enhance that in-arena experience. So I think they were just trying to show what he would look like in front of one of those promotional screens or something like that, and it just didn't work. It made him look terrifying. My first thought was, why this? What's the point? And any kid, like even if the kids are the audience that it's for, how would a kid not be terrified by this? He looks creepy. And I think the video was poor, and that's the problem. Because as the week went on, the video that they posted on Instagram of Gritty meeting Claude Giroux and Wayne Simmons was some of the funniest stuff that you could see. It had charm to it. It was comical. The smile on Wayne Simmons' face did really say it all. And then watching the interaction with Giroux, signing pucks and things of that nature as part of what they do behind the scenes at training camp, kind of, and handing one of the pucks over and putting it in front of Gritty and going, here you go, Gritty. And the reaction that gets, it was just so funny. I mean, and sure enough, as the week went on and these videos popped up and the Tonight Show thing and all of that, I really started to warm up to this thing a little bit. My first reaction on Monday was, how long is this thing even going to last? Because this could fizzle out as quickly as the other one did. They tried this once in their franchise history in 1976, and it lasted 1 year and it was gone. My thought was, how long is this thing going to last? Because it doesn't seem necessary, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to stick with this fan base. And then the first night really kind of drove that point home because people did not seem to like it. It got a poor reaction on social media. It got a really poor reaction at the game. And then as the week went on, he became a A-list celebrity in Philadelphia, if you will. He was everywhere. He was going places. It's been nationally received, which is incredible. And I think it's a light angle to everything with the Flyers. There's so much talk about. We could sit here and we can come on here every week and talk about goaltending and poor defense and penalty killing and what Dave Haxtell did or didn't do and what Ron Hextall did or didn't do. And we can talk about that stuff all the time. And maybe people don't want a distraction from the game. But every now and then, I think about the Phillies and the downfall they had from being a World Series winner, runner-up in the World Series, and then slowly falling from grace to be a team that nobody really cares about in the city. And the fact that when you do happen to go to a game, you could be having a really rather miserable time watching the team on the field, but when the Philly fanatic comes out, you get a laugh for 90 seconds. And that kind of does the trick for you a little bit. It's kind of funny. You like personality. So I think it gives the team a little bit more personality. I think it's funny. I kind of got to admit, when they unveiled it, not only did I think the video was a little bit creepy when it was first unveiled, but I took one look at the name and I went, well, boy, takes you back to the days when Ed Snyder was screaming about how this was their culture. And because Gritty is a name that seems to fit that culture. So why not? Let's name the thing Gritty. Sure. Whatever. And even the story about how, like the opinion article on Philly.com from Ed Snyder's grandson about how he wouldn't not that we don't like that. It's not that we don't like the mascot, but it doesn't define what grit is among the Flyers fan base. Well, maybe it'll come around a little bit. You have to give it a little bit of a chance. I wasn't sure I was going to be willing to because I kind of take what you were saying, Rob. This is, they've never really had a mascot. They've tried it one time way before our time, and they've never really had one. Why did they need one? I do think that the rumor that you were talking about where the league kind of mandated that they adopt a mascot isn't true, just because the way that Flyers PR has played this off, this was in the works for 2 years, and it was something that I think they wanted to do. And I think the angle of being the only team in the city without one does play a factor. To go to community events and see the Philly Fanatic, or go to community events and see Swoop, the Eagles mascot, or all the college mascots, or now, even or the Sixers or anybody like that, even the Philadelphia Union has one now. It was kind of like they were starting to get outnumbered and they were a team that just didn't have something. So it's funny. It's comical. It gives you a reason to laugh a little bit. If you're not going to laugh at the team, laugh at this thing, or if you are going to laugh at the team, this will keep you laughing. Who knows? But I got a kick out of it after a little while. But my first impression was not good at all of this thing. And now I'm laughing right along, and I'm starting to like Gritty. I think it's kind of funny. So
I think if they were going to go with the mascot, Flex.
I would have loved to have seen that too. I mean, I thought Flex was great for the Phantoms, but you know what? This thing, Flex kind of gave off. The exterior was a little different. He was a superhero type, character, and I understand that, but
he threw a peanut at my head one time when I was like 11 years old.
Only you would have something like that. Only you would have an anecdote like that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I always thought Flex was, the most kid-friendly thing either. I thought Flex was good for, 9 or 10-year-olds in a way. It fit that kind of mold once kids are really getting into superheroes and that kind of thing. But the mask being as tight as it was, and he was, Flex was also not as much of a costume. It's not fluffy. It doesn't, say, come give me a hug. It's like, come pose and flex with me. That's why my name is Flex, that kind of thing. So I see what they were trying to go for. Like, yeah, Gritty kind of looks like a Muppet, or, something on Sesame Street, or, anything like that. Or the Fanatic's cousin, like we said, wherever he may be from. And that's whatever. You can interpret it however you want to. I think they just wanted to go with something that was really kid friendly, especially for younger kids. I think they really wanted to do that. And I think mission accomplished, because I think now more than ever, people are really interested in gritty, and that's going to be a cool thing. So for our final thought tonight, as we wrap up the show for this week, we do want to add one more footnote from kind of the former Flyer archives, if you will, and we're going to talk really quickly about Scott Hartnell. He announced his retirement on Monday, and after 17 years in the NHL, 7 of them were spent with the Flyers. And really, there's not much more to say on Scott Hartnell than what he was and how he kind of embraced the city. He was a big community figure. He had great success here. And just Rob, give me your, for like the next minute or so, just give me your thoughts on Scott Hartnell, the career he had, and your take on him as he announces his retirement.
Yeah, he was a fan favorite at the time he came to Philly. He was somebody who I'll never forget that year. He was very productive alongside Giroux and Jaromir Jagr, the 2011-12 season. One of those guys who there wasn't a lot of finesse to his game. There wasn't a lot of style, and that's partially why he was went over so well in Philly. Just because Philly's a very no business. We know Philly's the no business blue collar town that it is, and he's somebody who kind of fit that mold very well. And, it's I think that he might be auditioning with NHL Network. I've seen him on several times where he's doing some analysis work with them, which is I think it's a good move for him career wise. He was one of those guys, great personality, outspoken. He's one of those guys that very well could have made for an excellent media analyst, and I think that's a good role for him. But he was a neat guy to have around in Philly for as long as they had him, and obviously nothing but the best for him in retirement.
Yeah, I think about him a lot with the 2010 Stanley Cup final run, especially the series against Boston after the first 3 games. He was a real integral part of that and had one of the goals in Game 7, that kind of stuff. I think about that a lot. I think about him the more, when I wrote the story for sportstalkphilly.com this afternoon, my thought kind of was, as I looked at the pictures that we could use for it or something like that, I grabbed one from him in the Stanley Cup final with the full beard going, and I remember all the comparisons to Yukon Cornelius from the Christmas special, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and things like that. And I just, how much, and he had a personality that would embrace things like that, though. That was the cool part. He was such a personality. I even remember at one point in time that year with Jagr and Giroux, I think it was the Players Association, the NHL Players Association, handed him a camera and had him document a road trip or document stuff at training camps or at practices and things like that. Little things in the locker room, things like that, or hanging out outside of the rink and things like that. He was good for that kind of stuff because he could give it a little spin. He could add his own personality to it, and he could make it funny, and he could get laughs out of his teammates for that too. So I think it was, he was just that kind of guy. He was really a power forward type. He had that, no pun intended based on the last topic, but he had a gritty edge to him as well. And, I also think about, you mentioned how he had that career year in 2011-12 with playing alongside Giroux and Jagr. And I think about the playoff series against the Penguins and all the things that happened in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia and things like that. You look at, it was, doing the Hulk Hogan hand of the year thing, and trying to get people, in response to Pittsburgh fans and just, I mean, think about the little, all the separate line brawls that happened over the course of that series. And the one, he gets into a fight with Craig Adams, I believe, and starts noting that Adams was pulling on his hair and things like that. And as he skates off after kind of pointing out to an official this was happening, or they start to escort him to the locker room, to the tunnel. And as he's skating off, he's throwing his hands up in the air. He's pumping up the crowd. He knew how to get the fans on his side, and he knew how to do it, with whether it was stepping in to be the physical guy and drop the gloves with somebody if necessary, or he could score goals too. So he had a tremendous amount of success. And I didn't realize this until I started to look up some of the numbers. He played the exact same number of years in Nashville and Philadelphia. Nashville was over 2 different time periods. He signed there for last season, and that was his last year in the NHL. And his first 6 years were in Nashville also. in his 7 years in Philadelphia, he actually did play in more games as a Flyer than as a member of the Predators. So I found that interesting as well. There was obviously the 3 years that he spent with Columbus as well. But all in all, he had a really great career. He was on top of his game. He was great. He was an all-star that 1 year we were talking about too. So best of luck to him in the future, whatever it may be. I think he'd be great for the NHL Network or anything like that. So best of luck to him in the future. And I think that's a great way to wrap up our show this week. I think it's just to talk about a guy who really embraced Flyers culture, embraced Flyers fans, and was one among the fans, I think. So great way to end the show. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Flyerdelphia podcast. We want to thank everyone for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Flyerdelphia podcast. Again, we are on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Video content will be starting up very soon. One way you can expect a preview video of the season opener from me on Thursday. I'll be posting that so you can watch that beforehand. I'll give you a little primer on what's to come in that game between the Flyers and the Vegas Golden Knights. I'll also be doing a Facebook Live chat and Q&A leading up to puck drop on Thursday. I'll start that at about 9:30 and take you up to about 5 minutes until the start of the game at 10. And also remember to check us out on SoundCloud as part of the Sports Talk Philly podcast network. Listen to us and our other shows on the rest of the Philadelphia sports scene. The Phillies season did just end, but if you want to get your Phillies coverage, you can listen to the Phillies Nation podcast on Sports Talk Philly. The Sixers are going to be starting up very soon. They actually, in fact, have a preseason game on Monday night, so you can always get started on that. The Pick Swap Pod is your source for Sixers coverage on the podcast network, and the Eagles coming off a bit of a rough loss, a bad loss against the Titans, as we talked about a little bit earlier, but if you want to hear anything about that, the Kelly Green Boys covering the Eagles, that's all part of the Sports Talk Philly, the Sports Talk Philly podcast network. So on our next episode, we'll be back with a couple of regular season games to look into here and discuss. Flyers will have opened up with a couple of games in Vegas and Colorado, and ahead of the home opener, I should say. We'll kind of break down what happened in those first couple of games and see if there's anything that can kind of go from there. And anything that can be improved upon, anything that changes with the roster, you name it, we'll have it for you. We'll also have anything else in Flyers news as well. So once again, thank you for listening. For Rob Riches, I'm Kevin Durso, and this has been the Flyerdelphia podcast on sportstalkphilly.com. This has been the Flyerdelphia podcast, part of sportstalkphilly.com, with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heening.